सकता है आवाज थोड़ी आगे पीछे हो जाए तो मुझे बता दीजिएगा
इंशाल्लाह।
So we were discussing about the key performance indicators of educators. We discussed about several issues about with regards to the parameters of performance that needs to be evaluated and improved upon. We discussed how this evaluation is not for testing, but for improvement. It's not to pressurize, but to enhance. This is what we had seen. Last time we also saw how it's not just the classroom performance that matters. Yes, that is the primary thing, but along with it, the classroom follow-up activities that the teacher does, the process of examination, how the teacher conducts, the extracurricular activities, the general attitude of the teacher, and the way she inculcates value among the students. All of these factors are important when we evaluate a particular teacher. Then we saw how we should set the learning goals. Learning goals should be clear and specific, and they should be attainable. And we also saw that there are two kinds of learning goals. One learning goal is skill-based. The other learning goal is character building, is trait-based. And then we saw how to introduce, whether the teacher introduces the chapter in an effective manner. How does she narrate a story? Does she narrate it like a newsreader, or she is expressive? And we saw one of the things that needs to be evaluated is whether she probes the students well enough. How the quality of her questions. Quality of questioning is an important aspect of teaching. How to question, how to provoke the minds of the students, whether she does that or not. Then we saw that this teacher should move from the known to the unknown. It is important for the teacher to pre-assess, to gauge and pre-assess the prior information. This is of critical importance. Then another thing that needs to be evaluated and observed in a teacher in a performance is whether there is sequence, whether there is connectivity and coherence in what she is teaching, or whether she teaches one thing and suddenly she goes to another planet and there is no rapt, there is no connection between the two. Does she do that? Or is there a sequence? Does she know clearly the path that she's setting? She knows where she's taking the students, whether there is a sequence, connectivity, and coherence in what she is saying. This is important in teaching. Then there is another thing that needs to be observed, which is connected with this, which is called as scaffolding maneuvers. Scaffolding. I don't know how many of you have seen a scaffolding. I am sure most of you would have. Do you know what a scaffolding is? Scaffolding means, in the earlier times, scaffolding used to be bamboo sticks tied together around a building when the building has to be painted. Right? When the building has to be painted or some repair work has to be carried out, that's called a scaffolding. The worker steps on that scaffolding and takes a step one by one, and he goes ahead, he moves forward, he goes up. That's what a teacher should do with her chapter, with her content. Step by step, gradually she should take it further. She shouldn't directly jump. Right? Gradually, slowly and gradually, she should take the chapter further. Right? This is important. Another thing that needs to be judged is whether her instruction is clear, whether there is clarity in the way she speaks, whether it is structured and comprehensive instruction, or whether she speaks and then leaves it and then goes to another topic. No, she shouldn't be doing that. It should be a structured process where she knows where she is going. Then while teaching, during the process of teaching, does she conduct periodic but subtle feedback while teaching? When she is narrating something, she speaks it out, and then while she's talking, she takes feedback as well. Feedback in terms of whether the students have understood. She asks such questions while teaching to keep in touch with the level of understanding of the students, whether the students are understanding or not. It's called as periodic. Every now and then she keeps on doing that. The students don't realize that she's testing their understanding, but she realizes it. She understands it. So whether she does that, whether she off and on keeps on asking questions to ensure they are understanding, or whether she just keeps on speaking and speaking, irrespective of whether the students are understanding. There's another way, which is not effective, obviously. So this is another thing that needs to be evaluated. It's one of the key performance indicators. It is one of the parameters that needs to be evaluated. Another thing is that once she takes the feedback, ongoing, concurrent, regular feedback through questioning, through activities, and when she gets a feedback, does she tailor her teaching according to the feedback? That's another thing to be tested. That she got the feedback, she understood, she realized where the students stand, but she is not tailoring her further teaching according to that feedback. She continues in the same rhythm where she wants to continue, where she had left off, irrespective of that feedback. Then what's the point of taking the feedback? When you're asking a question to realize, to understand how much the students have understood, then based on that understanding, you should continue your teaching rather than taking feedback and then leaving it and then continuing in the same rhythm without giving any consideration to the level of understanding of the students, whether the teacher does that or whether the teacher tailors her teaching according to the feedback. This is important. Another important thing that the teacher must do is repeat. Repetition is an important part of teaching. There will be certain core aspects, core subjects, core topics within the chapter that needs to be repeated. Allah ke Rasool sallallahu alaihi wasallam bhi repeat kiya karte the. We find many instances where the Prophet of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to repeat certain instructions, certain statements three times. Why? Why he used to do that? There was a reason why he used to do that. Because repeating certain important issues makes students understand deeper, makes students retain better, makes students recall better. You find some of the very good orators, you will find them. When you ask them a question, they will paraphrase that question and repeat it before answering. Why do they do that? So that there is clarity of understanding and better retention of what is being discussed. So repetition is critically important. Yet another thing that is important is effective usage of classroom space. Whether the teacher remains stuck in one spot in the classroom right in front of the board, or whether she moves around. Whether she's moving around or she's getting stuck in a particular place. This is important to understand and important to note. That an effective teacher does never get stuck to a particular place in the classroom. She always moves. She moves around in the classroom. Right? But then again, you've got to understand, too much of movement of the teacher is a distraction. How much movement should be there and how much movement is a distraction is something that you have to understand. Every couple of minutes, 3 minutes, if she's moving around, it's understandable. But if she continuously keeps on moving around in the whole classroom, and if she's going back the students have to turn back then to look at the teacher. Very often, that becomes a distraction. So you've got to judge, depending upon the way the classroom is designed, the setup of the classroom, how often she should move, how fast she should move, or how slow she should move. If she's moving too rapidly, that's also not correct. Able to understand? It should be a gradual, steady pace of movement that the teacher should conduct in the classroom. And most of the movement should be in front of the classroom. Sometimes she should go in the aisles just to keep the students alive. This is important. Whether the teacher does that or not, this is to be evaluated. And all of these things, the KPIs that I'm narrating to you now, it's not just for the observer, for the in charge, for the principal or the coordinator, whoever, supervisor. But these KPIs have to be taught to the teachers themselves so that they understand and learn what are the things that on which we are going to be evaluated. What are the aspects on which we are going to be evaluated? And what are the things we must practice in the classroom to become effective and efficient teachers? So these KPIs should be taught not just to those who are in charge, but also to those who are actually teaching. Another aspect that needs to be evaluated, and the aspect which I must say, with regards to understanding, all the teachers should understand all of these aspects, not just the one who is supervising. So another aspect that needs to be evaluated and kept in your mind while teaching, taken into consideration, is the real life applicability. Whether the teacher speaks or connects the subject matter with the real life of the students. This is important. When the teacher is teaching about Tipu Sultan Rahmatullah Alayhi was backstabbed by Mir Jafar. That's happened in history. But is anything such as this happening in real life? You have stories in real life, especially if you're teaching to the higher standard. You can narrate, you can talk about what happened in Karnataka. You can talk about what happened in Maharashtra, how the political game unfolded in Maharashtra or in Karnataka or in Madhya Pradesh, right? This is real life. And when the students are grown up, 9, 10 standard, they can understand. They must be aware of what is happening around in their country, in fact. So while teaching history, you're teaching that history gets repeated, tends to repeat itself. And even in today's world, we have horse trading and politicians sell their soul for a few crore rupees, right? This is real life applicable. If you're teaching smaller children, right, you can't talk about political examples. You can't talk about big issues of the society. You can talk about their compass box, their water bottle, their tiffin box, something that they can relate to. Their mother, their father, something that they can relate to. But real life applicability should be there. Whether that real life applicability is on the larger canvas or their personal lives, depending upon the student level, the grade level that you're teaching. But real life applicability in teaching is one of the important aspects of teaching. So this is something that has to be observed. This has something that has to be taken into consideration and learned as a skill. Whether the teacher promotes conceptual cognition instead of rote learning, this is something that has to be observed as well. Whether the teacher makes the students understand, makes the student think, makes the student ponder, or whether the teacher indulges in rote learning, whether the teacher explains, whether the teacher engages and interacts, or whether the teacher just plainly makes the students repeat after me, and the students are just repeating. That is just simply rote learning. So whether the teacher promotes conceptual cognition or whether she is just merely doing rote learning, making them rote learn. This is something that has to be observed. Then another thing that needs to be observed is whether the teacher does transdisciplinary integration of the subject matter that she's teaching. Transdisciplinary integration, which can be also called as multidisciplinary learning. Whether the teacher can correlate with other subject and other topics and other subject matters. Science, while teaching science, if she is teaching vocabulary, she's teaching English. While teaching English, if she is teaching, if some chapter comes in such a manner, she can refer to some aspects of science. It can happen. Because remember, the subject matters that we are teaching, although they are different subjects, many a times you find interrelations between them, connections between chapters, connection between topics, connection between subjects. It happens. Education is not a process wherein there are watertight compartments, where there is absolutely no relation between one subject to another. It doesn't happen. Especially when you go in higher standards. You can't solve problems, you can't solve theorems of physics. You can't solve the theorems of physics unless and until you can't solve the problem sums of physics unless and until you have learned calculus in mathematics. If you go in 11th, 12th standard, you learn this, there you will come up with this situation. Unless you learn differential equations, you can't solve problems of physics. This happens. Subject matters are interrelated. Right? Simple, even in a lower standard, when you're teaching science and introducing a new word, which is there in the chapter, this is language teaching. You can't say, I won't explain this new word because teaching of vocabulary is English teachers' work. No, you can't say that. It's come in your chapter. It is there in your chapter. So you have to explain that word. So what is this? This is teaching language while teaching science. So this correlation, transdisciplinary learning, multidisciplinary learning, whether the teacher does that or whether she, in Urdu, they call it lakir ka fakir, meaning just sticking to what the subject is there. Sometimes the teacher has to go off on tangents. Don't go too much off on tangents, otherwise your portion won't get completed. Everything has to be done in a balanced manner. Right? So this is one aspect that has to be observed. Another aspect that is of critical importance is whether the teacher subtly interviews, whether she does an interviewing of moral messaging while teaching. This is important. Moral messaging while teaching. This is of critical importance. If you are a value-based school, Islamic school or a value-based school, it is of prime importance that you interview moral messages, Islamic concepts, value inculcation while teaching of subjects, whether it be geography, mathematics, science, English, whatever. Because moral values are not supposed to be taught only by the ulama in the school. It should also be taught by the different subject teachers. Like for an example, if the teacher in this classroom is teaching about big and small, greater than, less than, maths teacher, she can introduce an idea, a concept in the class. If a child is big, if a student is big and a student is small, big and small, she can talk about a student, maybe Akbar who is big, maybe Aslam who is small in size. Now what should Akbar do? While moving down the staircase, because he's big and hefty, he should push Aslam aside. Should he do that? No. Then what should Akbar do? What can Akbar do to help Aslam who is small in height? Maybe if there is a book on the shelf in the classroom, which is the little fellow cannot reach there, Akbar should help him take that book. for an example. So the big ones in Islam help the small ones. The strong ones in Islam help the weaker ones. So what are you doing? You are teaching values. The subject was greater than, less than, bigger and smaller mathematics for a small child. So what are you doing here is you're teaching, you're bringing in value inculcation while you're teaching your subject matter. Many a times the schools have grandiose statements, vision statements. Knowledge is light and we want to make leaders and so on and so forth. Big, amazing vision statements. Most of the time, the teachers don't even know what their vision statement is, what the vision statement of the school is. Most of them, they don't know. They are unaware. And those who are aware of the vision statement, for them, we have to understand. They have to understand that that vision statement is not just to be written in a particular place on the gate or the principal's office or somewhere, or on the notice board. The vision statement is something which has to percolate down in the subject matter that is being taught. Otherwise, what is the point of having that vision statement? The vision statement doesn't make sense unless and until that vision statement is translated into practical teaching while teaching practically. So having a vision and trying to percolate that vision into every activity that happens in the school. That vision statement should permeate in the entire school ecosystem. This is important. So this is something that has to be observed, whether the teacher keeps the vision statement in her mind while teaching and ensures that the overall vision of the school gets percolated down in the teaching process in the classroom. This has to be taken into consideration, and whether the teacher does value inculcation while teaching or not. This is important. Another aspect that is important for a teacher to become a holistic teacher, for a teacher to become an effective teacher, is being cognizant of the attention span of the students. This is an important aspect. Attention span. This is very important. This is an important aspect of teaching. Because if the teacher continues speaking in one rhythm, without taking into consideration the ability to grasp of the students, then she loses the plot. Because if she continues to speak in a monologue fashion, the students have a limited capacity to pay attention. She has to every now and then pose questions, interact, engage, get them involved. This is important because the students have a limited attention span. She cannot just keep on going one-way traffic. She has to stop. She has to engage. She has to interact with the students. She has to ask them questions. So whether she gives due consideration to the attention span of the students or not, this is something that has to be taken into consideration. So these are things that we have to evaluate. Then another thing is humor. Whether the teacher uses enough doses of humor in the classroom, makes the student laugh, makes the student smile, right? And when I talk about humor, I'm not really suggesting structured jokes. You can use structured jokes, but I'm talking about spontaneous humor, which naturally unfolds in a dynamic classroom. while talking, right? While talking. Say, for an example, you're teaching the concept of big plants like an oak tree or a banyan tree and creepers. So if there is a boy who is Akbar, who is very, very fat and very tall, very big, hefty, suddenly you say, creepers like Akbar, and the students will laugh. Spontaneous humor. Because Akbar is not like a creeper, he is like a banyan tree. Right? So on the spot, circumstances unfold wherein you make students laugh. This is an important aspect of teaching. Now, in an online format, I can't do that. When I actually teach these subjects, these topics, when I actually train in a physical workshop, I actually make them laugh. Right? Even a trainer has to do that. Likewise, a teacher has to do that in the classroom, making them laugh, making them cheerful, cracking jokes, and conducting yourself in such a manner that off and on, every now and then, you indulge in spontaneous humor that breaks the monotony, right? That enlivens the spirit of the students and the entire classroom. And the students are, quite interested in learning when the classroom is cheerful, when the teacher is cheerful. Right? So these are certain important aspects that I had to discuss. The list will continue, inshallah. We have a few areas, topics, right, that needs to be covered to understand how a teacher can be an effective and holistic teacher, and what are the holistic performance parameters that a teacher needs to keep in mind. And these are the very parameters which are called as key performance indicators, KPIs, which an in-charge person, the principal or the supervisor, also has to keep in mind while she's evaluating a teacher. And then after the evaluation, the teacher has to, the supervisor has to train the teacher where she has done well, which areas, and in which areas of teaching proficiency she needs to improve upon. Right? So we need to understand this process. Inshallah, we'll continue with this process next Saturday. Jazakumullahu khair wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Alhamdulillah, Hazrat. Very good